everyone for joining us for the latest edition of the Getting Started with Dimension. We're continuing on part 2 of our discussion from last month. Last month we really went over how to get Dimension installed, set up and configuration of the VM, and then also how to determine sizing guidelines, processor hardware specs, those kind of things that are needed on this. So today I want to jump in and start going with the configuration of the box and getting the most out of your logging. So very first thing, we're going to get rid of the PowerPoint because we're just going to jump straight in and deal with some of the settings in Dimension. So at the most basic level, the very first thing, once you got Dimension set up and running, you do have to point your firewall to the Dimension server. If you have to send the logs somewhere, and tell the firewall where to send those. So a couple of quick things that I want to cover and run through in our policy manager, so in the actual configuration of the firewall itself. Very first thing is open up your policy manager, go into your setup, and go to logging. And you do have very first section in here is a checkbox that says send a log message to these WatchGuard log servers. And with that, when we go in here, this box has already been set up and configured, but we will come in here and do a quick edit. And this is the information that you guys are going to need to be able to point your firewalls into the logging server. First of all, you need an address to point to. This, in many scenarios, many cases, will be on your local subnet. On my network, that's the 10.20.30 network. If you need to, it is just a matter of if you need to point this to something that's across the internet, same information, 108.252.197.9. If you're taking notes, that's my public IP address on the network. And then the encryption key. This is what you set in the setup wizard of your Dimension server to encrypt the logs as they travel back and forth. So whether it's going over your local network or whether it's crossing the internet, these are set up and they are using AES 256-bit encryption to encrypt everything as it's going across. Now, if anybody has updated to version 11.10, that version of our software has really only been live for a week now. But you will notice one thing in here. We do have the ability now, if you are running version 11.10 or higher, we will have the ability to send to 2 log servers at once. In previous versions of the software, 11.9.5 and lower, you do not get this second log server button. It was previously set up so that you only log to 1 device at a time. So that tells the firewall where to actually ship these logs off. In addition, you have other settings. This is strictly the WatchGuard logging tools. If you want to do other things like SNMP or syslog, there's other settings in here that we'll cover another day. But for now, thing to remember is the WatchGuard log server, your syslog server, SNMP servers, whatever else you have, are going to be set for other things. Now, the second change that you're going to want to make to all of your firewalls, in the past, the WatchGuard default has always been, we're going to log what's denied because we're blocking something. We want to be aware of what's getting blocked. But if it's traffic that we're allowing through, hey, we trust that and we want to let it go without paying much attention to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new rule to my firewall real quick, just for illustration purposes. When I add this HTTP rule, whether it's a packet filter or if it's a proxy, either way, standard web surfing rule, the very first thing that you're going to want to do is go to the properties of that log rule. And this is, we'll call this one webinar demo. And I'm just going to go ahead and say OK here real quick, just so I can show you this difference. If you'll notice in my policy manager here, this one does not have any of the other icons showing. The icon, you can get a quick eyeball and always look at it and determine if logging has been enabled. If you've turned on the extra logging, it's the the icon here that looks like a blue notebook page or a blue and white, whatever color that is. So you'll notice this rule does not have that in place. So in order to log what's being allowed in addition to what's being denied, we come into our policy, we go to the Properties tab, and there is a logging button in here. And by default, sending log messages for allowed packets is not checked. So to get the most out of your dimension server, to be able to get the highest level of reporting and get the best record of what people are doing, where they're going, what's happening with the firewall, you do want to come in and check this box on each one of your rules. And once you've done that, you can eyeball down the list here and see if there's anything else. Here's one other rule that I don't have that enabled for, so I might want to come in, even though this is an automatically generated rule, I want to have that information appear in my dimension server so I can come in and turn that on in each of those. Now, one of the strengths of the WatchGuard firewall is the fact that we are a proxy firewall, so we're doing packet reassembly and we're seeing at a higher level what the data is, what the traffic is making up. So we can see the difference between a Word document and an Excel document. But as we go into these settings, inside of our proxies, there's some additional logging that you're always going to want to turn on. Now, prior to 11.9.3, this box was not enabled by default, but it is enabled 11.9.3 and higher now, enable logging for reports. But really, because we've got this tremendous log server, if we see a checkbox anywhere that says log this action, we want to do that. So let me grab my brand new rule that I turned on here. And we've turned on logging in here, but when we go into our proxy actions, of course, these new defaults in 11.9.3 have the enable logging for reports turned on. But when I start getting into some of my other sections, if I go into my web blocker and I create a new web blocker policy, when I start looking at the categories, no matter what I'm blocking, or even if I don't want to block anything, if I want to leave that wide open, there's still a log this action checkbox down at the bottom. Anywhere you see one of these, if you're running Dimension Server, the new rule is if you see log this action, check that box. If you don't check some of these boxes inside the different components, for example, this web blocker category area, if you don't check the log this action, you won't get the URL categorization report. This is what enables you to be able to say, we had 17 people go to a instant messaging website or an ads website or whatever you happen to be looking at. So those checkboxes for log this action are much more important. Of course, if you've got an exception in here, you have somebody going through this, log these things. You don't necessarily want to turn on alarms, but you do want to log these actions. That also includes if you're doing reputation-enabled defense, make sure you turn on the logging. APT blocker has its own log configuration page. So all of these different pieces, you want to turn on the logging for those. Another place where you will have the ability to lose reports if you're not getting the information you need. Application control. It's always a great feature of the Dimension to be able to see who's doing YouTube versus who's doing Spotify versus who's playing with Pandora, something like that. In order to get the reports on your application control, you also have to come in here, even if you're not blocking anything, you still want to enable the application control, and the global database by default is just blocked. If I show only my configured applications, nothing here is blocked at all. It's an empty set. But by turning application control on, I am going to get the reports on what applications my users are using and taking up bandwidth and possibly, spending time doing things other than work. So again, on the firewall side, that's really all we have to do. Point it to the log server, and then also make sure if you see a box to log an action, check it, enable the logging for each rule, and to get your application reports, make sure you enable application control, even if you're not blocking anything out there. So we want to be able to identify that traffic. So from there, let's look at, now we're sending all of the good data to our Dimension server. let's get in and let's cover some of the setup. This is the main screen of my Dimension server. All of your administration tools are up here in the upper right-hand corner under your administration menu. And I'm going to work from the bottom to the top because this you'll use the top areas the most. The bottom sections you'll come in and set up once or twice and not go through those. So I'm just going to touch real briefly on those. Under administration and your system settings, this is the place where you will go to once my box catches up with me here. If we need to shut down Dimension, if we need to do a restore, if the new version comes out and you want to upgrade it. This also gives you the ability, if you're publishing this out to the world and you want to put a publicly signed certificate on the front end of this so that people don't get the certificate error, this is where you would generate your CSR and put in this information that you guys are used to for generating a public certificate. Other stuff, other settings in here, you have your basic configuration. This is going to be system name, your interface settings, your domain settings, your time settings. One thing I do want to point out, you'll notice everything in here is grayed out. I can do a view, but I can't modify anything. So anytime I want to make any kind of configuration change to any one of these admin pages, you will see on every page this switch to read-write mode. You can have multiple admins logged into Dimension at any given time. But by switching to the read-write mode, at that point you check out that page to yourself. No one else can get into that page and keeps you from stepping on each other's toes when you're doing this. And now you'll notice all of my information is now writable. I can edit these instead of view it. So again, here under the configuration setting, we can change our public our IP address, not our public IP. Put in our domain settings, DNS servers where we point for that, NTP. Now we did get some questions after the first session that we did of how do you back up your database. There's two pieces to that. The very first one is going to be in here you've got to set up and configure a remote backup. Now the remote backup does require some kind of FTP server to be able to do that. It's going to actually go out on port 22, an SSH connection to an FTP server. So when you turn this on, you'll give it a host name, you tell it which port you're looking for, give it your username and where you want to send this to. And so this is how you would set this up. You've got to do a little bit more setup than just throwing a Windows directory at this. You've got to have the ability to do this, the file transfer protocol to back this up. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is just put in your host name. Again, this is where your DNS server will come into play, where it's going to look that up through your local DNS. So make sure when you're pointing this to a DNS server, don't use Google. Make sure you use your local DNS server on your network. Most networks have a DNS server at this point. And then once you've finished with your changes, you're always going to get a save button at the bottom of the page. And it should warn you if you try to switch to different sections, it should pop up and say, I didn't actually make any changes there. I turned stuff on and turned it back off. But it will warn you, do you want to save before you move on? The Diagnostics tab in here just gives you a few things for the operating system. We can run, if you're working with support, you can do that. You can run a ping. You won't ever have much need in here. You can get your history of system tasks, log messages, all of that kind of admin overhead thing that you shouldn't need to worry about. The next section in here, though, is our user management. Now, user management can be very useful if you're hosting Dimension for somebody else. If you're using it just for your internal network, you can set your IT group up, or however you want to set these up to for multiple users to get in. If you're hosting this for somebody else, if you want to let somebody get in and look at and view and review their own logs, we can set up multiple users in here. Again, first thing, switch to read-write mode. That'll take just a second. The page goes green. I know I'm ready to do that. Now, the first thing I want to show you in here is the Active Directory settings. This is another reason why it's important to have it pointed to a local DNS server, because when we add in our Active Directory connection, our Active Directory domain, All we do is we give it the DNS name of that. So in my case, it's stlg.local, and I can point it to that. Then when I add new users, you'll notice I've got one up here. The username is danG@stlg.local. So if I edit this guy, we can get in here. We see I've actually created this as a Active Directory user, so that if you want to give people on your domain access in here, you can tie it to that, so they don't have to remember multiple passwords. If we just add a user, we have the ability also to create it as a local user, Active Directory user, or an Active Directory group. So if I want to give it the name of IT, for example, whatever you have set up there, you can do an IT group, you can do an IT individual user, or Active Directory user on this. Now your different levels here, I'm just going to go back to local user so I can fill this out and give it a password. Passwords must be 8 characters. It will prompt you for that. If you need to add a user that has just the ability to look at the reports and not manage any settings, that's going to be your view reports. If you want them to have the ability to get in and also view the raw log data and look at the log database, you can add in that ability. When you're at this level, you can also lock them down and say, I only want them to have access to this one particular device or group of devices. You can add several in there. So this will create a user for our webinar. It's a local user. Here's his password. He can view the reports and view the logs off of this one device. I can then set up a port 443 rule for an SSL page to forward in from the outside, publish this to the world, and now I've given one of my clients access to look at his own reports on his own firewall, so he doesn't have to call you every time he wants a report ran. Now, as soon as I add in the report administrator role, it takes away the ability to select an individual device. Report administrator gives you the ability to actually schedule reports to be emailed out. So that you have to have the ability to select which devices you want to look at there. And then, of course, super administrator is self-explanatory. It can do anything in the system. So if you create one of these additional accounts, these levels would be your own internal IT staff. So let me cancel out of that. We don't need, I've done a few tests along the way, as you can see, so we don't need any more accounts in here. So that covers your user administration to log into the system. If we look at going through our different tools here, the database part of our administration, this is just going to give you some basic information about what processes are running on the firewall, gives you the ability to stop and start the processes. Not a whole lot you're going to be doing with this section. Also look at log messages as you scroll down. So log server management, this is where we'll spend a little more time looking because we have a little bit more information that we can get out of this. Right off the bat, you're going to get a status information. The log server, you can see, has been up for one day and 14 hours. We can stop the database if we need to. Tells us how our CPU is running, what kind of memory we're using, and also how big our database is. So as we jump into the next section here, our configuration, we can put some of that information to use. And again, once my screen catches up to me, let's look at a few things here. So we'll switch to read-write mode. And if I need to change my encryption key, that's going to be the first setting here. And my poor VM host is seen better days. If anybody has an old server laying around they want to send me, I happily take that and get off the old firewall that I'm running as a VM host. Changing our log server encryption key, though. This is what you would put into the firewall on the other end that you can then point to and get this information encrypted between the boxes. Keep in mind, if you change this, you're going to have to travel to each firewall or connect to each firewall that's reporting in and change the encryption key from there. The next section here is our database size, and this is one of the things that you probably want to keep an eye on. With this gives you the ability to see we've got a maximum database size. Now, by default, when you install Dimension, we talked about last time that this was you get a 40 gig database. with that, because it's using the internal post-GRE SQL database, you lose 20%. That's just a hard and fast rule. If you're using an internal database, keep in mind you're going to lose 20% of that for the actual SQL operating system and program files, all of that. So my maximum database size, I get 32 gigs out of my 40 gig database. My current database size is I'm using 30 gigs of that 32. I have a gig and a quarter free, 4%, but I've also got this firewall set to automatically delete log messages that are older than 365 days. Well, because of that, my database is basically full. I'm only going to get, in my particular case, I've got a small network, I'm getting about 4 months worth of data retention, even though my database is set to delete logs older than 365 days. So this, again, if you're looking at retaining data for a longer period of time, or if you've got multiple firewalls that are logging to a single dimension server, you want to pay attention to this, and when the database gets full, it's a matter of just going to your VMware settings and increasing your database size so that you can have more retention. And it is purely a function of pure physical size. First logs in or the first logs out. It will overwrite these as needed. So you, if you need for compliancy purposes, government, federal regulations, if you need to have your logs around, you need to pay attention to your database size, how much you've used, and increase that accordingly. So in our other location, we set up the database location where we want to back it up, as we looked earlier. Now in here, under my configuration, is where I actually configure how often I want a database to happen, and it's telling me, yeah, you got to go to System Settings, Configuration, and complete the remote backup setting. It doesn't like having one without the other. But then I can choose to back this up every whatever time period fits for you. And then the last section down here, if we're looking to go to an external database to get that 27 or that 20% back, you can then point to an external database and fill in the information that you would need here, IP address, port, database user, password, and send that over. So I'm going to jump on to my next tab. My Notifications tab is going to give me the ability to send emails. Anytime I have in my Policy Manager, let me bring this back up here. For example, if I do something inside one of my settings that antivirus is easy to look at, I'm looking at logging this information, but if I set my firewall to send an alarm, that is then going to talk to the Dimension server, read these SMTP server settings, and generate an email off of that. So if you turn on alarming, you have to make sure on your Dimension server, the log server is what actually generates those alarm emails. Now, there's some basic stuff that we can get when we have a failure event. If there's an event notification, there's your alarms. If you purge messages, we can send those through. Point it to the IP address of your email server. If you have Exchange 2010, 2013, if you need to send credentials, you can. And then how you want where you want those emails to go and who they're coming from, and then the subject line of that email. So right now we can only send the emails to a single person at one time. If you want to send those alarms to multiple people, I would suggest setting up a distribution list on your mail server. So moving right along here, we're almost at our half an hour, and we've got a little bit of stuff to cover. Reporting gives us the ability to create custom report templates. The first piece of this is going to let you add in your own name, your own header and footer on these reports that we generate, and then put your own logo into those. And if you want to do this for all of your different reports, so that all of your reports that you're scheduling have the same information on them, you check the box for that to be your default custom template. That means every report generated will use these customizations. Otherwise, you can select which reports you're emailing and scheduling out to go to different locations. With the next section here, we have our FTP servers. Rather than emailing reports, if we want to put them onto a file share on our network, again, we've got to have an FTP server in place that's going to accept those connections coming in, and we can add in an FTP server so that these get archived on a server on your network. And then the last bit is if you do have ConnectWise in your network, you can also enable the ConnectWise integration, and it will send reports over through that. So I'm going to speed things up here a little bit just to make sure we get as much covered as we can in the half an hour time. The next section gives us our IP address mapping. And there's two pieces in here as we switch to read-write mode again. The very first one is going to be dynamic IP address resolution. This is just a checkbox that is going to let you point it to your DNS server and say, try and resolve any host names that you can. Do a host name lookup for those records. There we go. This is, again, just a checkbox. Now, if you're doing this across a WAN link or over the internet, you're not going to have local DNS. You're not going to be able to do local DNS resolution. If this box is checked, it's not going to hurt anything. It's going to go to its local server and try and look things up. If it's in a different subnet, it just won't be able to look those up. The other case where you might run into is if you have boxes that have no host name to them. For example, my email security appliance is the WatchGuard XCS 570. I have the ability to come in and put a static mapping in place so that anytime my logs see the IP address 10.20.30.11, I want the name XCS 570 to show up in my logs as opposed to an IP address. And then the last little bit in here, the last section would be diagnostics. And this is something that's more going to be for when you're working with support at WatchGuard. If you're having some problems along the way, this will give you your log messages, different information in here that support might want to look at or see, or if you need to purge those log messages to free up some space, you can do that from here as well. So that covers, under administration, that is 4 of the 5 sections. Now the last piece in here is the ability to send out a scheduled report. If you used the previous WatchGuard logging and reporting server, while it gave you some good data, it was a little bit clunky, especially when it came to the fact that when it emailed you, it would email you and say, hey, your report is ready. And rather than email the report to you, you had to then go and retrieve it. And I did just check my clock. It looks like we're at 12:30. If anybody needs to drop, thanks for attending. We've got just another 5 minutes or so to cover things, to cover our setup here if everybody else wants to stick around. So again, I'm going to switch to read-write mode here so we can look at and create a couple of new scheduled reports. And when we do this, we hit add. Right off the bat, we'll just give this a quick name, webinar demo, and this is the monthly tips and tricks. So first of all, resource selection. This gives you the ability, do I want to report on all of the devices that are on this server, or do I want to get a report off a specific device? And when we do that, we add in, we select which one we want to pull the report from. Now you can create groups. Say you have 10 firewalls reporting to this log server. 5 of those pertain to one particular client. You can create a group and say, for that group, here is all 5 firewalls, and then I get an aggregate report across those 5 firewalls. So if you want to do subsections and reports, you can do it a little easier by creating groups inside of here. So right now I'm just going to pick my primary firewall, and we want to create the reports from that. When we go on the destination, do we want to send it to an email? Do we want, and in this case, we'll put in an address. You can modify the subject and body settings if you want to. That is just some basic information here. Also sending reports, dumping it off to that FTP server that you would set up on your network, or you can send them to your remote backup location. Since we're using FTP as the back end for either of those, you can do that, which server you point to, and then drop it into a specific subdirectory if you want to. You can also send reports to ConnectWise automatically as well. In this case, I am just going to do strictly the email because I don't have an FTP server set up. And then we click Next. Now, when we get to our report selection, there's going to be a couple of different things that you have the options for. First of all, we can do our executive summary report, which gives you the top 10 clients, top 10 domains, top 10 attacks, top 10 things that were blocked across all of our different categories. We can also get in and specify if we want something more than the executive summary report. We can have all of the different reporting available from this. So we have our application reports. We have compliance reports. We have HIPAA and PCI compliance reports. So we can schedule those to be sent to us automatically. Packet filter summaries, proxy summaries, web traffic reports, any report that's available inside the Dimension server, we can set this up and schedule it to be sent out automatically so the boss can keep tabs or we can get an idea of what's happening on our network. So I've picked a few reports in there. The next section is going to be our time zone. This is going to be important because every log entry in the Dimension server is recorded in UTC time, Universal Time, Greenwich Mean Time. So when you're generating a report, if you're generating a report that lives in a different time zone than the Dimension server itself, you want to make sure you account for that in the time zone settings so that it generates the report with the correct local time. Now the report template tells the box to use one of those template generations that you created with your own logos, with your own names. Report options, do you want a single report? Do you want a combined report? If you were doing multiple firewalls, you have the ability to choose those. And then the last section down here, how often do we want these reports to run? Do we want to send it out daily, weekly, or monthly? Reports are generated and emailed automatically at midnight, whichever 12 a.m. Based on your time zone setting up here above, and it'll give you the last 24-hour period from that. So that's all it takes to set up a report to be emailed out to you automatically. Then you get, if we go back here to the home, I'll just pull up a quick example of our, maybe a quick example of the executive summary report, and maybe we'll go try our demo network. This one might get us in a little bit faster. We'll let the two hosts compete here and see which one's going to give me the best response. So I drill into my M400, and again, the first rule of live demos, don't do live demos, but as I move along here, the system seems to be slowing down a little bit on me. And again, this is really more due to the VMware host that I'm running on as opposed to bandwidth considerations, anything like that. So while that's going, I do want to just review real quickly for everybody. I do record these webinars so that if you want to go out to YouTube, if I can pull the right, there it goes. If you go out to youtube.com, once you're there and you click on the right window, that always helps. From youtube.com, you can do a search. I must have somebody playing games upstairs on me or something. My internet has gotten extremely slow here. Anyway, youtube.com, do a search for DGeisler WGSE, and that will give you my channel, all of these videos that I've recorded. I will post up here shortly after the webinars. So again, DGeisler space WGSE will give you all of that. And maybe it's just my computer runs slow because I can't even get this thing to type at this point. So with that, with some technical difficulties wrapping up here, let's just jump back here and see if we ever got our executive summary report. Here it is. We can click on the export to PDF, and this will give you an example of what one of these reports look like. We'll open this. And if Adobe Reader isn't too slow, which has been known to bite me in the past, sometimes Reader crashes more than the computer does. So we get our executive summary report and can see here's where your logo would appear, where you see the watch guard up in the corner. Executive summary report, you can modify these names, you can modify the headers and the footers to give you the information, and then this report is emailed out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, however you want to set up and configure that, and gives you this kind of information. What attacks have we blocked? What clients are going out there? What domains are they going to? What kind of URLs are out there? Top applications, we can see things like YouTube or Shockwave Flash or Facebook or whatever it happens to be. Android browser is a big one. Remote desktop protocol. I was on the road, so I was RDPing back into my server quite a bit, so we see a lot of hits there from that. So all of this information is here and available at your fingertips, and the Dimension server will give you that real quick and easy way to see all of this. And our YouTube just is not responding. There it goes. DGeisler WGSE. And I can't type my own name. I missed the I. So DGeisler. There we go. Search for that, and there's your. That'll give you the all of the videos that we've recorded. So with that, as things are starting to fall apart on my computer here, that's a good indication for me that it's time to end the webinar. We've gone a little bit over time anyway. So again, please make sure you enter your questions into the question box. We will answer all of those and get back to you on these. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Elaine.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone that stayed on through the end of the webinar.